Welcome back to Just Chattin', and this is the series of videos we do on Thursday and Sunday evenings just for our own entertainment. So for all you Audie fans, Audie is sleeping on my bed, and he's been pretty much comatose for the last week or so, and he has not been going out very much, which is a good thing. And I know a lot of you have commented over the years saying you shouldn't let him out. He was a stray. I cannot keep him in. If he wants to go out, he's going to go out. But I am just as grateful as anyone if he's going to spend a little more time indoors. The downside of that, though, is when he stays in, he uses his cat box more frequently, so I have to change it more frequently. And this is no small job, because this cat is not satisfied with 10 pounds of litter in there. Oh, no. 40 pounds. It's got to be 6 inches deep or he's not interested. And then as soon as I change it, he goes in, curls up on the litter. Now, mind you, it's clean litter because I don't think even he would do this when it's dirty. But he'll take a little nap on it, just to make sure the litter smells like him. Because remember, he's got that whole thing. Everything has to smell exactly like everything else. I must smell like him. He must smell like me. The litter must smell like him. My bed must smell like the litter. It's this whole weird cat thing he has going. So, other than I am going to be up to my eyeballs in cat litter as soon as I finish this video, everything is going well on the Audie front. All right, we're going to take a quick look at the intro and we will be right back. So we really have an interesting story tonight. A British journalist, Carol Malone, apparently went on some sort of talk show in the UK. I have not been able to obtain a copy of that clip, but as I understand it, she said that Doria Ragland spent a healthy chunk of Nutmeg's childhood in prison. Okay. Now, I can't support anyone saying something like that unless they have proof, and Malone did apologize, as she should. Because even though I personally suspect that is exactly where Doria spent a healthy chunk of Nutmeg's childhood, I cannot throw that out for a fact. I can tell you this is my suspicion. I can tell you why I suspect this. Oh, and I will. But am I prepared to say Doria was a jailbird? No, I'm not, because I can't prove it. And it is entirely possible that at this point in time, any proof that might have existed in the past is no longer going to be available. But that's a totally different story. So why should we be concerned about this? Well, unfortunately, and I know nothing about Carol Malone. Nothing. Well, I do know one thing. When the zombie apocalypse comes, I don't want to be anywhere near her, because at the first sign of trouble, boy, she folds like a cheap suit, doesn't she? Well, what she said is going to have ramifications for anyone making content in the Megxit community. She went out on a talk show, made a wild and frankly defamatory allegation. And she had to apologize for it. It was completely irresponsible. It cannot be defended on any level, even if Carol Malone is sure down to her bones that this is true. You can't say something like that without hard proof, because even if there's only a 2% chance that you're wrong, that 2% chance makes it libel. It makes it defamation. So, yeah, that was dumb with a capital D. But as I say, we are all going to end up paying for it. On the other hand, Nutmeg and Doria are going to pay for it too, because that opens up this whole can of worms and throws it back out into the media once again. Just because Doria and Nutmeg are denying it doesn't mean anything, because these people lie. Lord, Nutmeg changes her life story more often than most people change her socks. And it was Nutmeg herself who put out the initial narrative that made people suspicious about how she grew up with her father. And by omission, it's pretty clear from Nutmeg's narrative that her mother was not around. So let's start with that. When Nutmeg was on the Craig Ferguson show, among other things, because as we all know, she has this set group of stories that she tells and tells and tells again. It's the dish soap commercial. It's the how she worked in the Argentine embassy, the job that her uncle got for her by calling in favors, and it wasn't even a real job. It was a summer internship. And that when she was in school, she would go from school directly to the set of Married with Children in her little parochial school uniform and hang out on the set where she got to meet people and yada, yada, yada. It's that one of her set stories. Well, if you want to see the story, the Craig Ferguson interview is on YouTube, so I will put a link in the video notes. I usually do that when I reference this particular story, but I'll make sure I do it this time. And you just look at the story yourself, and you will hear Nutmeg's adolescence in Nutmeg's own words, and not even a vague mention of her mother. So that was enough to start people wondering what was going on. Nutmeg was 2 when Tom and Doria divorced. And Tom apparently did end up with, if not official legal custody, at least practical de facto custody of Nutmeg pretty much until she was an adult. So we know this. The woman's biography has been published, Lord only knows how many times. And we have heard the stories. So, as I say, people started digging. And when you start looking at, for example, the photographic evidence of Nutmeg's childhood, you see a scant handful of photos of Nutmeg with her mother. So I think I was able to come up with about 8 or 10 of them. I'm going to show them to you here as I talk about it. These are photos from her very early childhood, babyhood to toddlerhood. And we have, as I say, 8 or 10 of them. Perhaps it could be more. This is just what I've been able to put my hands on. And then, from the time that Nutmeg was around 7 or 8 years old, in school all day, that period, we only see a few scant photos of her with Doria. We have a lot of evidence, however, that Doria was not in her life. In Nutmeg's own stories about how she spent her childhood following her father to work. Basically, that is how she has presented it. We have stories from Nanaki Pretty, as retold by Tom Bauer, that Nutmeg was at Nanaki's house after school because Tom worked long hours. Well, where was Doria? So the interesting thing about that scant handful of photos of Nutmeg with Doria in that 10-year gap, say 8 to 18, is this is pretty much all we have. And if you look at the photos, most of them seemed to have been photos of family events, celebrations. They're not the sort of photos that kind of fall into a day in the life sort of thing. Why is this important? because we have a couple of quotes. And let's start with People magazine. And this is what People had to say. Ms. Ragland proudly raised her daughter and has never been in prison. GB News did not apologize voluntarily, but only to escape a defamation lawsuit. And it speaks volumes that GB News removed any trace of that apology within 24 hours of making it, the spokesperson continued. So that is what People magazine had to say about Malone's apology, that she was forced to make it in order to avoid a defamation suit. Well, yeah, because that's usually why journalists make apologies, to avoid lawsuits. In this case, to be perfectly honest, well, I've already told you my opinion. I think what she said was completely inappropriate and very, very stupid, because she couldn't prove it. And if, as she said, she was just quoting internet gossip, that's not the work of a responsible journalist. You don't just get on a talk show and spit out internet gossip as if it's fact. I don't even know what to say about this. As I say, I know nothing about Malone. What I do know, of course, is that we're all going to pay for her mistake. But let's walk away from that for a moment and take a look at what we do know about where these rumors are coming from. Now, this rumor has been circulating on the internet for a long, long time, and I have always suspected there was more fueling this rumor than simply the fact that Doria wasn't visibly around in Nutmeg's childhood, going basically from her school years. I guess that's the point we would be looking at. However, Lady Colin Campbell took a close look at this, and her book, Harry and Meghan, The Real Story, which was published last year, does take a close look at this. So let's see what Lady C has to say about it. From now until she went to university, Meghan would live mostly with her father. Indeed, her mother was absent to the extent that the first time the teacher with whom Meghan was most closely involved, her drama teacher, Gigi Perot, met Doria was at Meghan's graduation. This protracted absence has led to lurid speculation about where Doria was and why. There exists a record of one Doria Ragland, who was sentenced for fraud in the Riverside County Court, California, case ID MS 79453DR, as well as one Doria Lois Ragland with the offender ID of TS 36640720499061181 MS 79453DR 200001215. But this author does not suggest that these individuals are the same Doria Ragland who is Meghan's mother, and Thomas Markle Sr. has refrained over the years from violating his ex-wife's privacy, loyally refusing to discuss Doria's absence even with his other children. Now, what we should make note of here is that Doria Ragland, which frankly isn't the most common name out there, but it isn't the most uncommon name either, and Doria Lois Ragland, and we're getting into, very, very uncommon territory here. Those two Doria Raglands shared part of that same offender ID number. And just, you can take a look at it right here. The fact is, it seems obvious. I was going to say very likely, but we're beyond very likely. It seems obvious that the Doria Ragland that was charged with fraud and the Doria Lois Ragland are the same person. And you got to ask yourself, how many Doria Lois Raglands are there out there? I would say offhand, that strikes me as pretty compelling evidence. Is it hard proof? No, it is not. And Lady C, who is nobody's fool, was not going to come right out and say, here, look, I have her file from the California Correctional Department. Nope. She said very clearly she cannot assert that Doria Ragland is Nutmeg's mom, Doria Ragland. And that's what you have to do if you don't have hard proof. You have to basically cover your butt and let people conclude what they wish to conclude from the evidence you are presenting. And I gotta say, the evidence is more than enough to convince me that the odds are more likely than not that this Doria is Nutmeg's mom. So, does it necessarily follow, though, that Doria, who was obviously sentenced for fraud, was sentenced to prison for fraud? And I would have to say, no. People go before the courts all the time. They will get let out with a fine, a warning, probation, community service. Being convicted and being sentenced does not necessarily mean you're actually going to do time. Like I say, you could be sentenced to probation. You could be sentenced to community service. There are a lot of options. California tends to be rather creative, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if they had options I've never heard of over there. All right, excuse me a second. Let's just say hello, baby. We have a cat with us, and I am going to set him down so I can continue. This is what we know. This is what we can establish. We can couple this with the fact that Nutmeg said herself that she spent this time with her father. Her tales, her recounting of her life during this period show a definite absence of Doria. You couple that with the fact that we don't even have a lot of photographic evidence of Doria being in her life. We do have some, though. And those photos are scattered around during that period of missing time, from the time that Nutmeg was perhaps, like I said, about 8 to 18, the school years. The photos do seem to be spread out enough to at least convince me that if Doria had been sentenced to jail time, whether it was in a prison or a county jail or whatever, that it was probably not an extremely lengthy sentence, certainly not something that would have spanned 10 years or more, because, again, we see her in photos with her daughter periodically during this time frame. So, what can we conclude from this? Well, Nutmeg reinvents herself all the time. Lately, it has been very convenient for her to reinvent herself as, the proud black woman, to disassociate herself from the white side of her family, After all, Doria is the only one that she is associating herself with. And so apparently at some point it became convenient for her to pick and choose. Remember, she said she didn't want to have to do that as a child, but as an adult, she does seem to be doing this. I would have to say, reasonably speaking, what we are undoubtedly looking at is, let's just say, the best public relations cleanup campaign of all time. If Doria had been in jail, there can be no doubt that the British royal family would have to have been aware of this prior to Nutmeg marrying the sock puppet. It would have to have been. They would have done background checks on everyone, including her family members. So yeah, would they know? Yes. Would they have cleaned it up? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Keep in mind that the British royal family, well, the British government actually, probably with a sigh of relief from the royal family, worked very hard to keep the Duke of York's involvement with the Nazi Party in Europe during the Second World War very quiet. They went to great lengths to conceal letters, documents, all of the records that are now coming out, that are now showing us that, yeah, the Duke of York definitely had some issues. Leave it at that. So would they do this? Sure. This is small potatoes next to covering up for a former king collaborating with your country's enemy while your country is actively at war with that enemy. This is a walk in the park next to that. So, would it surprise me if they had had a hand in covering this up? Not at all. Would it surprise me if it turned out to be nothing more than Nutmeg's PR machine doing what it does best and spinning the narrative? Not at all. Not at all. I think all of the interested parties are, frankly, very experienced and very skilled liars. So, are we going to hear the truth? Well, not unless somebody shows up and says, yep, I was Doria's cellmate in Block C, and I can testify she was in jail. If that happens, then, we're going to have the full story. If that doesn't happen, no, we're not going to have the full story. So I guess at this point, what we have to look at is, yes, something like this happens. Some media person, or a person with access to the media, maybe that's the best way to put it, comes out, says something explosive that they cannot back up. And all they are doing is handing a loaded gun to the Sussex camp. And believe me, they are going to get as much mileage out of this as they possibly can. And as I said, those of us making Megxit content, we are the ones who are going to pay for it. Because now anything coming out of the Megxit community is going to be suspect because one person piddled in the pool. Yeah. Okay, that essentially is what I have for you today, but I thought it was worthwhile to take a look at this, why it is that people began to believe Doria had gotten herself into a little bit of trouble in the first place, and why it is that nobody else is going to come right out and say, oh yeah, jailbird. No, because you can't. You absolutely cannot. And trust me, if I could, I would. I would be happy to. But the fact is, I don't have the proof. I'm not even sure the proof is still available, assuming it ever was to begin with. All right, we are going to take a look at a slideshow on the way out. Thanks for being with us. I'm glad we got a couple of minutes of Audie time. I hope to see you all next time. And in the meanwhile, have a terrific day.